fans, it's EaglefanKarl. Just decided I'd do a quick check-in and give you some thoughts I've had so far on the preseason this year and sort of what has happened and some of the concern that Eagles fans have, and want to address a little bit of that and also talk about what I think it means for the season, and then also a couple position battles that I've found interesting this preseason. But first, I wanted to talk about some new additions. Obviously, I had the new intro, a little bit shorter, and obviously incorporates the big event that's happened since the last time I did an intro part of the video being the Super Bowl win. So I hope you guys enjoyed that part of the video. The other new addition has to do with something I got at the end of last year and never put it in. It was a Christmas gift last year from my wife, and that's this Eagles totem pole. So I guess the question we need to ask is, how worried do we need to really be about this preseason? It's obviously, there are a lot of concerns people have. Whenever you have a preseason game where the baseball team scores more runs than you score points in the preseason game on the same day, that's obviously concerning. And by the way, the baseball team, the Phillies, were facing a perennial Cy Young candidate and ended up in a pitcher's duel and still outscored the Phillies. So you put all that stuff together and it really is problematic for the Eagles and the offense. The ironic thing I find about all the panic that I've heard from Eagles fans is this is sort of the exact opposite of what we had in 2015 and 2016. 2015 being Chip Kelly's last year, 2016 being Doug Peterson's first year. And after the third preseason game in both of those years, everyone was convinced, hey, this team's going to be great. We're set. Sam Bradford looked sharp. In Chip Kelly's first year, everyone was convinced we were going to the Super Bowl. And going into even the year with the first year of Doug Peterson, people might not have been going that far, but they certainly were thinking this team's going to be competitive. They've got a shot at winning the division. And where did both those seasons end up? They ended up in losing records. So let's not overreact ever too much to what you see in one preseason game, especially the outcome of that preseason game. Now that said, it's not necessarily the outcome I think that is concerning most fans. I think what's concerning most fans is the way we're getting to that outcome. And, I'm not concerned about this team in the long run, but I am concerned about the opener against the Falcons and how we've looked in the preseason and what it means for that opener. It has a lot to do with guys that haven't played so far and the rust that they're going to have when they finally do get in there. Let's go ahead and list all the Eagles players that haven't played this preseason. Obviously, Carson Wentz hasn't played this preseason. Jason Peters hasn't played this preseason. You also have some receivers. You've got Alshon Jeffrey and Nelson Aguilar. You also have Darren Sproles hasn't played. Matt Collins has barely played in this preseason. There's a lot of guys on offense that haven't played, and so much of offense is based on rhythm and timing and stuff like that. And there might be some rust at the beginning part of the season. Even if Carson Wentz plays from the beginning, and even though he's played with those guys, it takes a little bit of time and reps to get some of that back, and I'm concerned that that is not necessarily going to be the case going into the opener against the Falcons. So that's a concern I have for that Week 1 game. And then some of the guys that have played haven't really shown me much. Mike Wallace is supposed to be the guy they brought in to essentially replace Torrey Smith. But I'm wondering if he's going to be this year's version of Torrey Smith, or even worse, what we had a few years ago with Miles Austin, or the other year we had Ruben Randall, who were veteran guys we brought in who just looked terrible. So that's the concern I have going into the season is Mike Wallace really anything to really hang our hat on? Torrey Smith was serviceable last year as a second wide receiver, and I think he really had great games where he looked sharp, but he had other games where he just absolutely disappeared. And that's my concern with Mike Wallace, is maybe that's what we're going to end up getting with him. And if you've got Alshon Jeffrey that's maybe not playing the first couple of games of the season because he's still recovering from the shoulder surgery, and then you've got, Nelson Aguilar and Matt Collins that are sort of knocking some rust off and haven't played much, all of that concerns me as it relates to this receiving core. If you've got Mike Wallace possibly ending up like a nobody and sort of disappearing into this offense. The one thing I will say about this is, yes, I'm concerned about that opener. Fortunately, we've got a Jameis Winston-less Buccaneers team we'll be facing in Week 2. And then after that, you've got the Colts coming to town, which the fact that it's at home makes me feel better. Who knows what Andrew Luck's going to be this year, coming back from his problems with his shoulder. So that really is a question mark game, but hopefully that's a game you'd be able to win even if you're not playing at 100%. So fortunately, the schedule works out a little bit in your favor after that first week against Atlanta, but it could mean, falling in the hole early on in this season if you lose to Atlanta, and that's going to be really important for tiebreakers potentially down the road if you're losing conference games. Before we panic too much, though, there are a couple things we need to consider. First of all, teams do not generally scout and game plan for preseason games like they do for regular season games. They're not looking at what the other team's defense is doing and trying to game plan and scheme against it, especially when you're talking about blitz pickups. That's not going to be something you're really going to be looking at doing. And for the most part, that's not much of a problem in the preseason because a lot of defenses don't like to blitz too much in the preseason because they don't want to tip their hand too much to teams for the regular season as to what they're going to be doing and scheming. Now, someone forgot to give Greg Williams, the defensive coordinator for the Browns, that memo because he blitzed probably more than most teams do in the preseason, and the Eagles struggled with that. Now, I'm not going to give Big V a pass for his play in that preseason game because he looked terrible, and he even admitted as much after the game. In the long term, though, I think Big V is going to be okay if he's needed because I think the Eagles will be able to scheme better around him. And they'll be able to give him a little bit more support like they did last year from time to time, with a tight end over on that side or a running back doing a chip block or whatever it is. I think they'll be able to give him support or running away from him on running plays. But let's face it, he needs to get his hunger back because it is not what it was last year, and his play has not been what it was last year. So hopefully Jason Peters is good and ready to go and at 100% at the start of the season. But if for some reason Big V's got to get into the game, I have confidence in the Eagles coaching staff that they'll be able to scheme around that. As it relates to the other preseason games, especially the Patriots game, that game was sort of a joke. I really think the Patriots were running the score up in the first half. Why else are you having Tom Brady play the whole first half, basically? I know Hoyer took a kneel down for the last possession of the first half, but essentially Brady played the whole first half. And I think that was sort of a joke, especially when the Eagles weren't playing their starters. Why do you still have Brady in there if for no other reason than you want to run up the score against the team that beat you in the Super Bowl? And if that's the case, if that's what they wanted to do, fine. We know when it really mattered who won the game and who was the better team. If that makes you feel better that you ran up the score in a preseason game against the second teamers, then great. More power to you, and hopefully that boosts your ego a little bit that got wounded after you lost a game that you were supposed to win. In short, though, I do think the Eagles are going to be fine as it relates to, going forward, and especially their offense. They'll be able to scheme better. They're going to have some players back that would have played if this game really meant anything, but they obviously were just keeping them out as precautionary measures. So I think once you get a full arsenal of playmakers in there, you'll be okay, and you'll be able to go forward and really be able to do what you need to do to make this thing work. And think about this for a minute. Why do generally a lot of the better teams in the league do poorly in terms of record during the preseason, and some of the worst teams do well? I mean, you think of last year, the Browns went 4-0 in the preseason and then didn't win a game in the regular season. I think one of the reasons you see that sometimes in preseason is because in the preseason, the good teams don't need to play their starters much. They're giving them rest. They're not going to take a chance in getting them hurt if they're borderline in terms of their health because they don't need to see them. They know what they can do, they know how they can perform, and they know when the season starts they're going to be fine. Whereas the bad teams are playing their better players longer because they really need to figure out exactly what it is they have, because the position battles there might be a lot closer because the players at the top are not as good, and they're probably closer in quality to their second and third, team players. So I think as a result, sometimes the worst teams perform better in the preseason for that reason. So like I said, in short, I think we're going to be fine. It does make me think that maybe I'm leaning towards picking against the Eagles in that opener. I'll have to see exactly what happens in the lead up to that game, but it does concern me for that opening game. But beyond that, I think the Eagles are going to be fine. Now, I do want to talk about two position battles that I've found really interesting in this camp, and that is for the sort of the bottom end of the wide receiver and running back positions. wide receiver, the top of it's set who's going to be on this team. You've got Alshon Jeffrey. You've probably got Mike Wallace. You've got Nelson Aguilar. You've got Mac Hollins. It's that fifth and sixth position that I think if they go with 6 receivers, that's more interesting. I honestly believe that Shelton Gibson has absolutely earned his way onto this team. If he doesn't make this team, I think it's a crime. If nothing else, I think he's going to be able to really help out on special teams. But he's shown he can be a deep threat, and his hands have really improved. So I think he deserves a shot. And if Wallace doesn't improve, I might even try and put him into that sort of second burner route. Burner position where you're really trying to get vertical down the field. I'd love to see Shelton Gibson in that kind of a role because I think he really can do that. You've seen that he's been able to stretch defenses in this preseason. So for no other reason, I think he deserves to be on this team for that, what he can potentially bring to this team. And I think everyone agrees that Shelton Gibson is on the team, and there's really probably no risk that he wouldn't make the team. How much of a role he has is probably really going to be the question, and I'd love to see him have a bigger role than maybe what is being envisioned currently. Now, that said, the sixth position, if they go with 6 wide receivers, which they have done, would be, I would think DeAndre Carter has earned his way onto this team from what he's been able to do. He's contributing on special teams. He has shown that he can, play in that receiver role if he's needed there. And really, I think that he should be able to really contribute in that sort of a role. But like I said, I think he's done enough to make the team. Of course, he might also be one of those guys that's subject to, if someone releases someone that the Eagles feel is an improvement, he might be the odd man out and loses position based on that. But I think so far he's done enough to earn his way onto this team. The other position battle, of course, is running back, and for that 4th running back spot, obviously the top 3 are set. You've got Jay Ajayi, you've got Darren Sproles, you've got Corey Clement. Those guys are all set to make the team. There's not even a question about that. The real question is, what about that 4th running back spot? And it really, let's face it, Matt Jones, if he wasn't already off the team, he certainly played his way off the team against the Browns the other night. So it really comes down to Wendell Smallwood and Josh Adams. Those are the 2 guys that they're probably really looking at for that 4th spot. Right now, I would guess that, unless something drastic happens in this 4th preseason game in terms of, one of those guys looking far superior than the other, my guess would be Wendell Smallwood makes the team and they try and stash Josh Adams on the practice squad, and I'd completely be okay if that was the approach that they took with that position battle. And then finally, the last one that I'll talk about is not even a position battle, but sort of a whether or not he makes the 53-man squad or not, and that's Jordan Mailata, who I think has absolutely wowed everyone with how quickly he's been able to adapt to the NFL game, not having played a game of football before being drafted by the Eagles. And I think long-term, he is a great prospect. I feel a lot better about him, 2 or 3 years from now playing that left tackle position than I do Vaitai. But the question is, can you risk putting him on a practice squad and possibly having someone else pick him up? For that reason, I think you've got to try and find a way to keep him on the 53-man roster. I don't see any way that he gets through waivers. I think some team's going to be desperate enough to probably pick him up and try and use him sooner than probably he should be used. But so far, he has looked tremendous. Granted, against generally third-teamers is what he's playing against. But I'd love to see maybe if they could give him some reps against some of the better players against the Jets, and maybe get him some earlier action to see just exactly how good he is against a little better competition. But I think long-term, he looks like a great prospect for someone who could really do a lot of good things. He's got tremendous strength and body size that I think you would love to see in a left tackle. So for that reason, I really hope they find a way to keep him, because I think he's going to be a great addition long-term. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the preseason. Let me know what you think. Are you really concerned about where this team is going? Do you have concerns for the season as a whole? Are you a little bit more like me and just are sort of worried about maybe how they'll start out and if they'll start out slow out of the gate for the season? Or do you think that, all this is being overblown and we're just going to run through the season without any trouble? Let me know in the comments below what you think. My plan right now is to go ahead and do another video next weekend where I'm sort of doing a, what's the likelihood that the Eagles could repeat. That'll also give me a chance to maybe hopefully get an idea of a little bit better what they're doing for week 1. And I'm not necessarily going to do a full season preview in terms of breaking down wins and losses, but I do want to sort of take a look at the broad picture and broad preview of the season and give some predictions about maybe what I think will happen this year. So look for that next weekend. Until then, fly Eagles fly.